Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLM life and some true crime content here on this channel. And some of you guessed it right, yes, we are going to be discussing Marilyn Monroe in today's true crime series. The reason why I chose Marilyn is because she was and always will be my favorite actress of all time. I do think that Marilyn Monroe was very misunderstood by some people because I know some people feel a certain kind of way about Marilyn. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down her life from start to finish, along with talking about some conspiracy theories surrounding her death and which one I kind of steer towards the most. With that also being said, just as a disclaimer, this video is for entertainment purposes only and just my opinions. Also, I always encourage people to do their own research because I am human. There are things that maybe I did not find in my research. So if you have anything else that you'd like to add, please leave it in the comment section below. If any of this content is your kind of thing, then make sure to hit the like button, make sure to subscribe, and I'd love to have you guys stick around. So before we get into the actual timeline of Marilyn and her life and everything like that, I did just want to ask anyone if you guys have any favorite movies by Marilyn Monroe. If you do, please let me know what they are in the comment section. My top favorite is Some Like It Hot. I do think that white chicks may have been inspired by Some Like It Hot, but that's my opinion. Of course, I don't know if that's true or not. The next favorite is Bus Stop, and then my third favorite is How to Marry a Millionaire. Now, of course, I love them all, but those are my top three. So most people, I feel like at this point, most people know a lot of the history behind Marilyn and her life, and I do think that she is very, very widely known. And it's been almost 58 years since her passing, and people still talk about her. People still, they have this fascination with her. I mean, I have her, I'm gonna pop up a picture, but I have her tattooed on my side. And please don't judge me for that tattoo, it has to get touched up. But people still, to this day, they talk about her, they talk about the conspiracy surrounding her death. So if you don't know anything about Marilyn, Marilyn Monroe was actually not born Marilyn Monroe. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen, and then later she was baptized as Norma Jean Baker. And she was born on June 1st, 1926 in the Los Angeles County Hospital. Her mother was named Gladys Baker, Gladys Pearl Baker, and her maiden name was actually Monroe. So that's where Monroe comes from for Marilyn Monroe. Now, Gladys was kind of a disturbed person, and this is where Marilyn's story starts to kind of get a little sad, and it'll paint a picture for what's to come in Marilyn's future. So Gladys Baker, she actually was married to a man who they had children with, and Marilyn did not find out that she had a half-sibling until she was 12 years old, and she did not meet her half-sister until adulthood. But Marilyn never knew who her father was. Her mom, I don't know if her mom maybe didn't know, but she never knew who her father was. She would come up with these ideas of who her father might be, but it was never, there has been speculation, but it's never been actually confirmed who Marilyn's father was. There was, in Marilyn's childhood, she ended up, because her mom ended up going to a mental institution. I don't know if that is the political correct term nowadays, but that's the word I'm gonna use. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anybody. But she was basically in and out of these institutions for all of her life. Her mother, Gladys. Because of this, Marilyn was put into the system. She was taken care of by friends. She was also taken care of by family. She was put into foster care. She was also, okay, before I move forward, trigger warning for this next thing I'm gonna talk about. While all of this was going on, Marilyn was actually abused by certain people that she was living with throughout all of this time of her bouncing around from home to home. So the reason why I wanted to talk about that, and I'm gonna put on the screen exactly what kind of abuse it was, because I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word here on YouTube. But the reason why I'm telling you guys this is because I think that this had a major role in her life, as it does for many people out there, not just actors and actresses. But at one point, when she was a teenager already, there was an issue with her living situation at the time. So instead of being put back into the system or back into an orphanage for the next just couple of years of her becoming of age, she ended up marrying one of her neighbor's sons, who was a 21-year-old. His name was James Doherty. And James and Marilyn would be, or at the time Norma Jean, would be married on June 19th of 1942. Now, at this time, Marilyn was actually 16 years old, and at this point in time, she decided to drop out of high school and become a housewife. In 1943, James enlisted in the Merchant Marines, and him and Marilyn would end up moving because of where they were stationing him, which was in Santa Catalina Island. And of course, Marilyn would move with him. And then in April of 1944, James was actually shipped out, and he would be out of her life for the next 2 years. During this time, Marilyn would actually get a job at a factory, and in 1944, she would meet the photographer David Conover. And what the photographer ended up doing was to kind of boost morale. He went into the factory and he would take pictures of the women that were working, and Marilyn, or at the time, Norma Jean, caught the eye of the photographer. So with that being said, in January of 1945, Marilyn would go on to quit her job at this factory, and she would pursue her career in modeling. In August of 1945, she would have already signed a modeling contract, and then by early 1946, she would appear on 33 different magazine covers. In June of 1946 is when she would actually sign her first acting contract, and then in August of 1946 is when her contract would finally start. In this time is where Marilyn, so the name Marilyn came from the Broadway star Marilyn Miller. And then, so what they ended up doing was they ended up taking Marilyn and Monroe, because it just kind of slipped right off the tongue, and it sounded glamorous, and it sounded like the persona that she wanted to have on screen. And that is where Marilyn Monroe came from. Now, this is when they would actually bleach her hair platinum blonde. They would change her whole entire look, and Marilyn Monroe was born. Moving along to September of 1946, unfortunately, because of Marilyn and her career and her dreams of becoming a star, this would in turn have her and James Doherty divorce in September of 1946. Fast forward to 4 years later in December of 1950. This is when there would be a negotiation for a contract for Marilyn Monroe to have a 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. Then in March of 1952, there was a scandal because of the photos that she took when she was modeling. I left this part out when I was talking about it. I just realized that they were nude photos. So in 1952, they were emerging to the surface, and of course, what 20th Century Fox decided at the time was they were going to tell the public that Marilyn Monroe was broke at the time, and that's why she posed for these photos and everything of that nature. And she actually, believe it or not, she did get sympathy from the public. At this point in time, it is said that Marilyn was starting to become well known for not being able to, for having a hard time working with her. A lot of people would say that they had a hard time working with her, whether it be on set or she would show up late, she wouldn't remember her lines, that sort of thing. And the directors also didn't like that Marilyn depended heavily on her acting coaches, which I will go over my thoughts on Paula Strasberg in a later part of this video, because I do have an opinion about her. There was talk of people saying that the reason why Marilyn was so hard to work with was because she was a perfectionist. She also had stage fright. And on top of that as well, she had low self-esteem, which I personally would agree with that. I do think that it was a combination of the three, because if you look at how her life was growing up, unless you go through therapy, I don't think that you would ever have a high self-esteem, no matter how widely known she was and no matter how much of a sex symbol she was. I do think that that is one of the reasons. And also, she was a perfectionist. There were times in some of the films that she would be known to have to take multiple retakes because she wasn't happy with her performance. Everyone else was happy with her performance, but her personally, she wasn't happy with their performance. So that is something that I did want to just kind of mention in here. This ends up being where her drug addiction would start. Now, she did not start off with an addiction. What they ended up doing was, and I want to make sure I get it right, so to help her anxiety and her chronic insomnia, she would start to use barbiturates, amphetamines, and alcohol, which in turn would make the issues even worse. And she would not become severely addicted until 1956. And then in 1953, this is when Marilyn and her makeup artist came up with her signature look. This is when Marilyn Monroe would become the true Marilyn Monroe, with the platinum blonde hair, even though she already bleached it platinum blonde, but she would have the platinum blonde hair, red lips, and the beauty mark. She actually did not have a beauty mark there. They would put that on her face. So that was that's when she really truly turned into Marilyn Monroe. 1953 would turn out to be a very great year for Marilyn. In June of 1953, Marilyn and her co-star Jane Russell would actually go to the Chinese theater, and they would dip their hands in the wet cement and have their ceremony that we all know about that happens in Hollywood with all of these stars, and it's a big moment. And then in turn, in December of 1953, Hugh Hefner would put out his first issue of Playboy, and Marilyn Monroe would be on the cover of that first issue of Playboy. Now, here's where my opinion on Marilyn's acting career kind of comes into play, and the people in the industry. We all know that Hollywood and acting, all of that, we all know that it is a very cutthroat industry, but I do believe that Marilyn Monroe was taken advantage of, because even though she had signed a 7-year contract, at this point in time, she was 20th Century Fox's one of the biggest stars, but she was still getting paid what she was within the first couple, when they signed the contract, which I understand there is a contract and I get it, but I think that once someone turns into such a big star, I do think that you should revisit the contract and maybe adjust what they're getting paid and that sort of thing. That's just my opinion. I don't know how the world of Hollywood works. I'm obviously not a star, and I don't ever think that I will be. I don't even want that. I don't know about anybody else, but I would not want to be a Hollywood star. That is just my opinion on the matter. Along with this contract and along with her not getting paid as much as some of the bigger stars that were under 20th Century Fox, she was also not allowed to pick her projects. So 20th Century Fox would basically just place her in all of these different movies that they wanted her in. And even though Marilyn wanted more serious and dramatic roles, 20th Century Fox kind of painted her as a dumb blonde. And the issue with this was that a lot of people actually in turn ended up thinking that Marilyn was a dumb blonde in real life. But what they don't know is that she was actually much smarter than a lot of people thought. She was very into reading, and when you listen to her and when you listen to her wit, there's nothing dumb about her. And there's also certain things that happen in the future, how Marilyn ends up negotiating, and I don't think she's all that dumb. Here's when that negotiating that I just talked about ends up happening. Well, if you did not know, Marilyn Monroe would go on to marry Joe DiMaggio, yes, the baseball player that a lot of people know about, in January of 1954, on January 18th to be exact. This would also be when Marilyn and Joe would go on their honeymoon to Japan. While in Japan, Marilyn decided that she was going to go to Korea alone. Of course, well, not alone, but of course with security and that sort of thing. And she would go to Korea and sing to the US Marines. And I believe this was over a 4-day period of time that she was doing this. But because of this, and because of her situation with 20th Century Fox, I think that she kind of did this as like a, not just for the Marines and to be nice to the Marines, but I think that she might have also done it as like a FU to 20th Century Fox, like, you can't tell me what to do, I'm gonna do what I wanna do anyway. And this really blew up into something that I don't know if she really thought it would. Now, the problem was that after this, she actually did get sick. I believe she ended up getting pneumonia after that because she was in a really revealing dress and it was very cold outside. But after this whole situation of her going to Korea and singing for the Marines, a lot of magazines and a lot of people were really excited about it. And what ended up happening was when she came back to the US in March, 20th Century Fox actually decided to settle with Marilyn Monroe and decide on what she was going to do in the future. I think this also had a little bit to do with the fact that when she did return to the US, she was awarded the Most Popular Female Star Prize. And like I said, Fox would end up settling with her in March, and they would change her contract where she would get a bonus of $100,000 and she would get the starring role in The 7-Year Itch. If you don't know anything about this movie, if you've never seen this movie, I'm sure you've seen the photographs of Marilyn in the white dress with it flowing up, coming from from the air from the subway system. That is The 7-Year Itch. However, because this happened, Marilyn was, I would say she was very good with the paparazzi. I do think that she loved to be photographed, and I do think that she did put on a show. I don't think that the acting ever stopped for Marilyn, and I don't know, I'm not a doctor or anything, and this isn't an expert opinion, but I think that her acting was kind of a way to help her cope with the issues that she did grow up with. But all of these pictures came out of her with the white dress, and Joe DiMaggio was not happy about this. So Joe would in turn end up getting upset about it. And then in October of 1954, Marilyn would file for divorce after just 9 months of being married to Joe DiMaggio. Fun fact, after filming was done with The 7-Year Itch in November of 1954, Marilyn would actually end up leaving Hollywood, and she would go to New York City with photographer Milton Green, where they founded their own production company, which was actually called Marilyn Monroe Productions. This was due to Marilyn being sick and tired of all of the dumb blonde and the sex symbol type of roles that she was known for. She wanted more from her acting. She really truly wanted to go into other things. She didn't want to be known as the dumb blonde or the sexy blonde. She didn't want that. She wanted more. Because of this would actually start a year-long battle with Fox. It started in January of 1955. But after the production company, Marilyn Monroe Production was started, she would actually start studying acting. This is where Paula Strasberg ends up coming into the picture. I have my own opinion about Paula and the way that she would coach her actors. This is just opinion based. This is just me. But I feel as though once you get to know an actor, you kind of get to understand who they are as a person. And the fact that Marilyn had such a terrible upbringing and there is trauma in her life, I think that Paula, what she did could have possibly done more harm than good. Now, I understand that the way that she basically coached Marilyn was Marilyn would, when she would act, there were a lot of people that would say that her emotions, when it came to her actual acting, that her emotions came from somewhere and that it wasn't just acting. It's almost as if she looked deep into herself and she used these emotions from her past or from trauma or something like that and used it for her acting, which is what made her such a good actress. However, the reason why I think that this could have done more harm than good is because Marilyn does have this trauma, or did have this trauma, and I don't think that that was a very healthy way for her to, I don't know, maybe I'm just looking too much into it, but I don't know. I have a feeling about Paula. I have a way that I feel about her and her style and everything like that. I mean, it did make Marilyn an amazing actress, but at the same time, Marilyn needed actual psychological help. This could have also been a way for Marilyn to cope with her trauma, and maybe this was her expressing it and coping with it. I don't know. I'm not Marilyn. I obviously have never met her or talked to her, so I don't know if that's what it is. But I just have a weird feeling about Paula. That's just me. Again, not trying to badmouth anybody, but that's just my opinion. I just have a bad gut feeling. This is where Arthur Miller kind of comes into the picture. Now, Marilyn met Arthur Miller in the 50s, in the early 1950s. However, this is when they would get to know each other a little bit more, and this is where they would end up becoming an item and getting married. The two of them, they ended up becoming a serious thing, I guess you can say, in October of 1955, when Marilyn's divorce to Joe DiMaggio was finalized and when Arthur Miller was officially separated from his wife. However, plot twist, the studio had actually told Marilyn that they don't want her to be married to Arthur Miller. They want her to end the marriage because at the time, Arthur Miller was being investigated by the FBI for allegations of communism and that sort of thing. You can look more into that if you'd like. And because of the marriage and because of the relationship, the FBI would actually end up also investigating Marilyn. By the end of that year, Marilyn and Fox would actually sign a new 7-year contract. And this is where I know that Marilyn was not a dumb blonde. This is where we should really give her more credit because she negotiated. And this would, here, just listen to this contract. So Marilyn Monroe Productions would not be able to finance their films alone. So Marilyn ended up actually trying to get more money, sort of a thing. So Fox would pay her $400,000 to make 4 films and granted her the right, that really makes me cringe, to choose her own products, directors, and cinematographers. She would also be able to make 1 film with Marilyn Monroe Productions per each completed film with Fox. And this is why, to anyone who thought Marilyn Monroe was a dumb blonde, she was quite the smart little cookie here. That, or she just has a really good That, or she just has a really good poker face and she's really good at calling people's bluff. With all of this happening with 20th Century Fox, even though many people might think that Marilyn's new contract with 20th Century Fox was a win, a lot of people were talking about that, but also a lot of people were talking about her relationship with Arthur Miller because of the FBI investigation. But of course, Marilyn did what she wanted and she stayed with him. And on June 29th, her and Arthur would actually get married in the Westchester County Court in White Plains, New York. This is also when Marilyn would receive a Golden Globe for Best Actress nomination for her performance in Bus Stop. Remember, second favorite movie of Marilyn's of mine. And then in August of 1956, Marilyn actually ended up filming Marilyn Monroe Productions' first production of The Prince and the Showgirl. This is when things started to get a little heated between her and her co-star Laurence Olivier. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I said that right. He would have this demeanor. He would kind of make these like condescending statements to Marilyn where he would say things like, oh, just act sexy. Like that's all you have to do. Like don't even bother with the acting. Just act sexy. That's what you're That's what you're known to do, right? That's not a quote. That's just me making up things. Not making up things. He actually said certain things to her, but this is just me saying it in my own, you guys know what I mean. But because of this, he also did not like Paula Strasberg. Remember? The woman that I talked about before that I also did not like. And this is where Marilyn ended up getting real mad, and she started to purposely arrive late. She would purposely just have her own schedule. And her reasoning was, quote, "If you don't respect your artists, they can't work well," end quote. Which she had a point. She had a very good point. If you're just going to have a condescending attitude to the people that you're working with, I mean, she could have handled it a little bit better. She could have. She was a little petty about it. But at the same time, girlfriend has a point. During this particular production, there was talk that Marilyn was becoming very dependent on her medications, or the drugs that I had mentioned before, that were the barbiturates, the amphetamines, and all of that kind of stuff. So this is where she ended up getting kind of dependent on it. And she allegedly, at this point in time, had a miscarriage. There has been talk of, now I didn't find an actual credible source, but I do believe that this is probably what was going on in Marilyn's life. She also struggled or suffered from endometriosis, and we all know that it's very hard for people to go through life with that. Women, obviously. It's very hard for women to go through that because that is very painful. It can really take a toll on your body. But this is where she suffered her first miscarriage. Once the production was over in June of 1957, the American audience didn't really like this movie all that much, but the European audience really liked this movie. And it was just better received in the European audience. Once she ended up coming back to the US, because she ended up going to Europe, I believe she received some kind of awards for this movie. So once she came back, she decided that she was going to take the next 18 months off, and she was going to concentrate on family and that sort of thing. Well, in 1957, Marilyn had an ectopic pregnancy. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but if you don't know what that kind of a pregnancy is, it is when the embryo attaches to the outside of the uterus, and then she had a miscarriage a year later. Marilyn would, after all of this, be hospitalized due to a barbiturate overdose. Unfortunately, I do think that this probably paid a very big toll on her mental health, because I've read so many things over the years about Marilyn, and it really seems like all Marilyn really truly wanted was, one, for people to love her, but also to have a child. Then moving along, in 1959, thanks to Marilyn's performance in Some Like It Hot, my #1 favorite movie, this would earn her a Golden Globe for Best Actress. So, round of applause for Marilyn. That's very exciting. After this is when you see Marilyn's decline. This is where it gets a little darker. This is where we start getting a little bit more towards her death and what led up to her death. If you did not know, which I actually did not know this, which is crazy because I thought that I knew everything that there was to know about Marilyn up until this point. Did you know that there was a producer, I forget what his name was, but he was really rooting for Marilyn to get the role of Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's. However, the reason why Marilyn didn't get it and why Audrey Hepburn got it is the fact that the producers and everything, Marilyn had a reputation, just like I said, for being very hard to work with. She wouldn't show up. She would take several takes of a scene because she wasn't happy with the performance, even though everyone else was happy with it. So with that being said, they ended up going with Audrey Hepburn. And honestly, as much as I love Marilyn, I don't see her as Holly Golightly. Maybe it's just because I've watched Breakfast at Tiffany's so many times, but I don't think that Marilyn would have made a good Holly Golightly. I think that that role was perfect for Audrey Hepburn. I really do. I'm sorry, Marilyn. But I also love Audrey Hepburn, and I do think that she did a really good job in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Anyway, moving along. The last movie that Marilyn would complete in her life would be The Misfits, which her husband Arthur Miller was actually the writer for. Me personally, I don't know how to feel about The Misfits. I think that it showed Marilyn's great acting style, but I don't like the storyline. I don't know if that makes sense. Now again, this might be a biased opinion because I don't like Arthur Miller, so maybe it's just I didn't like his writing style, but I do think that Marilyn did do a good job with the acting in that movie. I did think that she looked very... The only thing is that she looked very sad in that movie. You could just see that she was genuinely sad. And I don't know if maybe that's also another reason why I didn't like it, because I can't come to terms with the fact that Marilyn was sad. Remember how I talked about parasocial relationships? I think I have a parasocial relationship with someone who is no longer with us. That's just crazy to think about. After The Misfits in 1960, Marilyn and Arthur would file for divorce and they would be no more. At this point, Marilyn's health would start to deteriorate. She ended up having gallstones. I don't know if I'm saying that properly. Sorry if I am. And her addiction would actually get much worse, to the point where it's been said that people would have to do her makeup while she was still sleeping because of the barbiturates. Now, there's a detail that I wanted to throw in here from a podcast that I was listening to. They said that Marilyn wasn't really a heavy drinker. A lot of people said that Marilyn was portrayed to be a heavy drinker because of the people that she was hanging out with, and that the people that she was hanging out with, they were big heavy drinkers. So a lot of people were thinking that she didn't have a very high tolerance and that she was only drinking because everyone else was. But that's just a little tidbit of information. So, of course, after filming ended for The Misfits in 1961, this is where Marilyn actually spent 6 months with health issues. She underwent a surgery for her endometriosis, and she spent 4 weeks hospitalized for depression. During this time is when Joe DiMaggio would actually start helping Marilyn again. There has been talk that they were rekindling their relationship, but then there's also talk that they were just friends and that Joe was just helping her because he was her friend. And after all of this happened, Marilyn would end up moving back to California, and she purchased her home that she would later die in Brentwood, Los Angeles in 1962. On May 19th of 1962, is when Marilyn Monroe sang the infamous "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to JFK. At this point in time, Marilyn was actually in the middle of filming for Something's Got to Give, and she experienced more health issues, and instead of Fox kind of letting her get better, they ended up saying that they can't afford for another film to be behind schedule. And due to the cost of what was happening, they ended up firing Marilyn on June 7th and sued her for damages of $750,000. Well, Fox, yet again, put their foot in their mouth for like the 70th billionth time with Marilyn Monroe, and they ended up reopening negotiations for Marilyn in late June. They ended up reaching a settlement and a new contract, and of course, they went back to filming Something's Got to Give. Fox wanted to repair Marilyn Monroe's public image, so they ended up having her do some interviews with some magazines, which included Life and Cosmopolitan and also Vogue, which Vogue would include some editorial photos of Marilyn and also some nude photos of Marilyn. While Marilyn was living in her Brentwood home, she did have a housekeeper whose name was Eunice Murray. I'll go into the conspiracies surrounding Marilyn's death after I go over what everyone reported to be her death and what I guess they determined was her death. So we're just going to go over what is said to be what happened. On the evening of Saturday of August 4th of 1962, Eunice Murray was staying overnight with Marilyn. Eunice woke up at 3 a.m. on August 5th and checked on Marilyn. She saw that there was a light under Marilyn's door and she tried to get into the room. Unfortunately, the room was locked and there was no response from Marilyn. So Eunice called Marilyn's psychiatrist, whose name is Dr. Ralph Greenson. He arrived at the house a little bit after the phone call, and he ended up breaking into the window from the outside because he saw Marilyn was just lying there and not really responsive, so he ended up breaking the window to get into the room. Dr. Greenson would find Marilyn Monroe dead. He then called Marilyn's physician, Dr. Engelberg, who arrived at 3:50 in the morning and ended up pronouncing her dead on the scene. At 4:25, they notified the Los Angeles Police Department. It was said that Marilyn died between 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. on August 4th. The toxicology report showed that the cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. She had chloral hydrate and Nembutal in her blood, along with some of, I'm going to say this wrong, pentobarbital in her liver. They said that the possibility that Monroe had accidentally overdosed was ruled out because the dosages that they found in her system were several times over the lethal limit. I think that because she suffered from so many mental illnesses, and I think that because she overdosed so many times in the past, everyone just automatically would rule it as a suicide. They ended up ruling it as a probable suicide, but I think that if anyone was trying to cover it up, this was the perfect person to do a cover up with because she had such a history with it. And unfortunately, at just 36 years old, just like I said, it would be ruled a probable suicide. On August 8th, there was a funeral that was held at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery. That was private. Joe DiMaggio was the one who arranged the service, and he was the one that invited the people that were closest to Marilyn. And for the next 20 years, Joe DiMaggio would actually send roses to Marilyn's resting place. Here is where the conspiracy theories come into play. Before I go over which ones I tend to kind of, I guess, go with the most, I'm going to go over all of the ones that, well, not all of them. I picked out the ones that either made the most sense, and I also picked one that's really out there, like really out there as a conspiracy, which I don't think it's that one whatsoever, but I'm just going to talk about it because it is one of the conspiracies. But the reason why, if you saw a spike in the conspiracy theories being talked about in 2017, it's because there was actually something that was released in October of 2017. So in October of 2017, there was a release of the JFK files. The US government, they released thousands of classified documents relating to the assassination of JFK. There was one letter from the FBI to Robert Kennedy, who they were warned about a book, which is Marilyn Monroe's infamous diary, that we don't know if it exists, this is just allegedly, and that there was plans to reveal the details of the rumored affair between Robert Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. There was also rumors that Marilyn Monroe had an affair with JFK as well, but the way that I'm understanding it from everything that I was researching, it seemed like the rumor of her and JFK, if it is actually true, it seemed that though that was more of just like a fling, it wasn't anything serious, but it seems like the affair, if it is true, with Robert Kennedy, it seemed like that one was a little more serious of a relationship than just having a side chick. At least that's from the research that I was doing. I can be wrong. I can be. This is all just alleged, obviously. However, going back to the things that were unclassified, I guess you can say, conveniently, 300 pages of the documents were actually kept private due to a concern for national security. So there's that. It's also said that there were quite a few people who actually talked to Marilyn on the night of her death. They talked to her over the phone, one of which was Joe DiMaggio's son, Joe DiMaggio Jr. He had called Marilyn and told her that he broke up with a girl that he was with that Marilyn actually did not like, and Joe DiMaggio Jr. said that she seemed really happy on the phone. She seemed really uppity, and just she didn't seem like anything. It didn't seem like anything was wrong. It didn't seem like she had taken too much medication. It seemed like Marilyn was just happy and she was fine. Then the last person who is said to have had a conversation with Marilyn Monroe was Peter Lawford. If you don't know who Peter Lawford is, he is an actor and he was also part of the Rat Pack back in this time of Hollywood. I'm not going to go into who the Rat Pack is. I feel like a lot of people know who the Rat Pack is. If you don't know who they are, just look them up. And like I said, it said that he was the last person to talk to Marilyn Monroe that night. There have been reports, and these, I'm going to read this off because these are the reports and what he said or what the police officer said that Peter was talking about. So here are some things that were said about that night about the phone call. For some reason, however, he had a gut feeling that something was wrong. He states he still blames himself for not going to her home himself. She sounded despondent over her loss of the contract with 20th Century Fox and some other personal matters. Apparently, Lawford was trying to get her to come out with him and his wife for dinner that evening. Another fun fact, which is where this gets a little conspiracy theory. Peter Lawford was married to a Kennedy. So Peter Lawford, his brother-in-law was Robert Kennedy and JFK. So there's that. Remember that for a little bit later. Miss Monroe was still very despondent and her manner of speech was slurred. She stated she was tired and would not be coming. Her voice became less and less audible, and Lawford began to yell at her in an attempt to revive her. Then she stated, quote, "Say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself because you're a nice guy," end quote. And that comes from Marilyn Monroe. Then the phone ended up going dead. If you don't know how Marilyn was found, she was found laying on her bed face down with the phone still in her hand. And then, like I said, this is when the phone went dead. But here's something to note is that there have been allegedly things being said that Robert Kennedy was actually in Los Angeles at the time of when all this was happening, and he was there on the night that Marilyn had passed away. There is something that said that, of course, there's conspiracy theories saying that either the Kennedys did it, which I'll go over it in a little bit, that either the Kennedys did it or they had someone that did it. But the interesting thing that I found was that apparently Peter was driving Robert Kennedy to the airport so that he would be back on vacation with his family. And apparently he had been stopped by a police officer. This, I wasn't really able to find a really good source on this. It's just something that I read. So I don't know if that's true, but that's just something to kind of make your mind think, because it is a possibility that could have actually happened. Let's go over the actual conspiracies now that I've kind of given you a background and all this other stuff. Let's revisit the original story of how Eunice called the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist came over, broke in through the window, and then they called her physician, and then they called the police department. Very long time of not calling the police department, right? So let's get into the actual conspiracy surrounding that. So Greenson, her psychiatrist, said that he broke in through the window from the outside in. However, there's a little bit of conflicting information there, because the police said that when they arrived on the scene, it looked as if someone broke the window from the inside out. So when did that happen? Mind you, the police officers came at 4:30 in the morning, okay? There is a conspiracy theory that the housekeeper and the two doctors were in on this. Now, we're going to go over why. The reasoning behind this is because the room looked very staged. It looked very clean, it looked very neat, and on top of that as well, there was no glass. There was no glass of water. There was no glass of maybe even champagne, because Marilyn was known to like champagne. There was nothing there that would show that she swallowed a bunch of pills, right? And then on top of that as well, they said that the police officers, they said that it didn't really look like a real crime scene. It almost looked as if it was just way too staged. So did they maybe compromise the crime scene in between checking on Marilyn, pronouncing her dead, all that kind of stuff? Or was it just coincidence that the crime scene or where they found Marilyn just looked very neat? All of the bottle caps were put back on, all of her medication. There were also some findings that said that there was weird bruising on Marilyn. There was some kind of weird discoloration around her neck or her chest. Now, there's no actual source. This is just allegedly, so I don't know if this is just people talking or what the case may be, but there was some kind of talk that there were some kind of findings that maybe there was foul play. Here's where it gets interesting. When the doctors and the housekeeper were questioned by the police and they were asked, why did it take you so long to call the police department if you guys found her so many hours ago? Their response was that they had to contact the studio. They also had to contact the publicity department before they could inform anyone of what happened to Marilyn Monroe. Where, you know what, I can kind of understand, because Marilyn was a very largely known person. She was a public figure. She was a star. She is still a star today, almost 58 years later after her death. And so I can kind of understand that because of how well known she was, they wanted to make sure, how are we going to, basically, how are we going to deal with this? So I can understand that reasoning, but at the same time, there is allegedly talk that Marilyn was still alive at some point in between all of these people coming. Now, there's no reports that show that. This is just talk that she was still alive. So I feel as though if she was still responsive or if she was still breathing, they should have called someone to help her. That's just my opinion, of course, just my opinion. At the same time, the housekeeper, Eunice, her story has changed multiple times. She told one officer one story, another officer another story, and then later on in life, she would just not remember certain things, which I can understand. Once you get older, you don't remember things. You don't remember all of the events that happened. And if she really didn't have anything to do with it, I'm pretty sure that was probably traumatizing, that you're supposed to be taking care of this person, you're supposed to be her housekeeper, and then you see her lifeless in her bed. So I can see why she wouldn't remember details, especially just like I said, once you get older, you don't really remember these things. Some people might disagree with me, and some people might say, well, this is Marilyn Monroe. How did she not realize that, how did she not remember these details? Which, fair, I can understand that as well. People would later speculate that Marilyn had maybe lied to both of her doctors, both the physician and the psychiatrist, and told them that she wasn't taking certain medications, or maybe she wasn't taking as strong as a dosage as she actually was. So the conspiracy is that the doctors might be in on it because they were negligent, and obviously this would result in them being maybe even charged with this situation, maybe. And also, if it were to come out that the doctors were negligent and they didn't know what kind of medication she was taking, then that could also ruin their own careers, their medical careers. So there is a conspiracy saying that maybe they were in on it because they didn't know and they didn't want their careers to be over because it's Marilyn Monroe. That's just, I can see why they would be a little concerned about that. The reason why this doesn't really make sense is because there, like I said before, there was no glass or there was no water or there was nothing that she could take these pills with. The autopsy also said that there were no pills that passed through her stomach. There has been speculation that maybe it was injected into her heart, but I believe that one has been debunked already, but there has been talk that it was injected into her heart. Some people said that there might have been the lethal dose might have been in an enema form. If you don't know what an enema is, it's when they take the medication and instead of ingesting it or injecting it into your system the way that you normally would, that it was put through her bottom. That is what an enema is. It's just put into, use your imagination, into your bottom. And so that's how the dosage got into her system, the lethal amount of it, and that's why there's no pills that pass through her stomach. And the doctor that did the autopsy was actually very skeptical on everything that happened surrounding the death and everything that he found when he was doing the autopsy, because he said that the toxicology report was a little off, because he did find out that the contents from the stomach and the liver of Marilyn were destroyed, along with some of the organs were never tested. And there was talk that at one point, this is allegedly, that at one point he was told that when you're going to confirm this as a probable suicide, and if you don't do that, then you're going to have to find a job elsewhere, or that you would be sorry, or whatever the case may be. But again, that's allegedly. I don't know if that's 100% true. So the second one that I wanted to go over is that the Kennedys had something to do with it. Obviously, like I said before, 2 months prior to her death, Marilyn sang the infamous "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to President Kennedy, which this allegedly sparked some kind of affair. But again, it was said that that was more of just a fling and that Marilyn had more of an actual relationship with Robert Kennedy. This is all alleged, obviously. It's said that they may have killed her or had someone kill her because of the affairs, and apparently she was going to come out into the world and tell people about the affair. Or maybe she knew too much, or she overheard something while she was hanging out with them. And the housekeeper later would come out to say, now again, this is the same person who has changed her story multiple times, so we don't really know what's true at this point when it comes to the housekeeper talking. But the housekeeper said that she did see Robert Kennedy at the house the night of Marilyn's death. Now, there's also talk that there was something released by the FBI. There was a document that was released by the FBI saying that the Kennedys had a tie to some kind of drug or medication or something like that that could potentially be lethal if you or even something that you can overdose on, something that maybe you'd only take a little bit of and you would overdose on. So that was also allegedly released, and so take that and think what you will. The next conspiracy is that Marilyn was involved with the mafia. Of course, we don't know, but this is back in the time when it would make sense. It would make sense if she was, because back then you had a lot of different things going on in the world. But it said that Marilyn was taken care of by the mafia in order to send a message to Robert Kennedy. It's also because Robert Kennedy his whole thing was against the mafia. He was against that kind of behavior, which I think any politician should be. And if they aren't, then maybe they might be a little corrupt. Don't come for me. But they said that it could have been a message to Robert Kennedy. Next conspiracy, and this is the one that it's very out there. Some people might believe it, and please don't take offense if you do believe this, but I don't think this is it. But again, this ties back to the Kennedys yet again. And it's saying that the CIA took care of Marilyn because she knew too much about what had happened in Roswell, New Mexico. If If you don't know what happened in Roswell, New Mexico at the time, there was allegedly, it was talked about that there were alien sightings. They were aliens there. That's how the whole alien thing started in the government and the world and all of that kind of stuff. But it said that maybe Marilyn knew about these aliens. Maybe she was going to come out to the world and tell them. And because she knew this, because maybe she overheard this from one of the Kennedys when she was hanging out with them, that the CIA took care of her. There's allegedly some kind of wiretapping audio or something like that out there in the world. I was not able to find it, so I don't even know if it exists or if it's just part of this conspiracy theory. There's another one that says that Marilyn didn't actually die. The reason why is because when the first responders came to take Marilyn's body, they said that her body looked very weird and her body looked very different. There was also an interview with someone who, I don't know if they came across Marilyn's body or what the case was, but even they were saying that Marilyn just didn't look like Marilyn. Marilyn looked like a completely different person. Her nails weren't manicured. Her hair had been the bleach, and her darker hair, she had really long roots, so it looked like she hadn't really taken care of herself. Her legs weren't shaven, and it just seemed like it wasn't the Marilyn that they thought was going to be brought into the morgue. On top of that as well, they said that she may have not actually died and she may have just faked her death because the fame had become too much and that maybe she was trying to get away from it all. Maybe it really did take a toll on her mentally, so she just decided that she didn't want to do it anymore. The theory also states that she was maybe put into witness protection because she did know too much. And there is this diary that people keep talking about, and I have seen it come up multiple times, that there's a red diary that had a lot of secrets in it, and that Marilyn because no one's been able to find this red diary. So again, I don't know if it's actually true or what the case may be, but there was also there was an article that was released in 1982. And this sparked people to reopen Marilyn's case because there were so many conspiracy theories that were out there that people were just basically demanding that they reopen the case and that they reinvestigate, because it is a very mysterious death. Even though it would make sense for her to overdose, whether it was accidentally or on purpose, it would make sense. But just the fact that there were so many conspiracies and so many things that just did not add up, I feel like there wasn't really a really good investigation done. However, with that also being said, they ended up finding when they reopened the investigation that there was no foul play. So they ended up just closing it again, and then obviously, as I talked about before, in 2017, all of those documents were released, and that's when the conspiracy theories came back up again. So of course, I have an opinion on everything. So what is my opinion and my final thoughts on this whole situation? I don't really have a conspiracy that I go with the most, because they're just conspiracy theories, right? But I do think that there are so many conspiracies that are surrounding the Kennedys, which is why I do think that maybe there was something there. If they didn't do it, or if they didn't have anyone else that did it, there maybe was an affair. I don't know. But the fact that there's so many conspiracy theories that are linking back to the Kennedys is something that kind of always made me wonder. Now, of course, I'm not making any accusations against the Kennedys or anything like that, but it's just there's too many ties back to the Kennedys. Maybe it was one of their wives. Maybe one of them found out about the situation. Maybe the fact that Peter Lawford was the brother-in-law. I don't know. But there's something about the Kennedys that it always comes back to them. So that is a conspiracy theory that whenever it comes to the Kennedys, it's a theory that I do lean towards more than the other ones. I don't believe in the aliens one. I really don't. Do I believe in aliens in general? I mean, yeah, I do think that there's other life out there, but I don't think that, I don't know, I feel like that one's kind of a little bit out there, that I don't think that that's what it is. But again, that's just my opinion. My other theory is that maybe she accidentally did overdose. Me personally, I don't think that it was on purpose. I do think that if she did overdose, it was accidentally, because there comes a point in time where if you are an addict, sometimes you don't even know how much you're taking. And I think that she might not have realized that maybe she already took her medication. And maybe she just took more and she just didn't know it. And that happened. Maybe there was foul play. Honestly, there's so many things that don't make sense with her death that make me question, and I don't think that a good investigation was done. I really don't. And I know that a lot of people, when they hear about people that are still stuck on these conspiracy theories, they think that, oh, Marilyn's not actually resting in peace because so many people are still talking about it, and they still think that, you know, there is a conspiracy surrounding it. And I don't agree with that statement that Marilyn can't rest in peace. I think that the fact that so many people are really trying to get justice for Marilyn, I don't think that she's not able to rest in peace because of it. I think that she would actually not necessarily like it, but the fact that she always wanted people to love her. Look at how many people love her and are trying to figure out, did she actually do this on her own, or was this done to her? So, but anyway, okay, that's my theory or my thoughts on the conspiracy theories, but let's move on to my final thoughts on Marilyn Monroe in general. I honestly think that Marilyn had a really rough life. I feel really sad when I think about Marilyn, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a doctor or anything like that, so this is just opinion based. This isn't any kind of expert opinion. But I do think that when people think about Marilyn in a certain kind of way because of how many men she dated, and I do think that some of the men that came forward and said that they dated Marilyn after her death, I think that it was all BS, because I think that it was just a way for them to get some kind of publicity. A lot of them, the way that they talked about it, a lot of them had the same thing to say in the interviews, and they didn't really, it was just a generic thing that they said about Marilyn that all of us already know about Marilyn. So I feel as though a lot of people probably did it as a publicity stunt, just to be able to say, like, yes, I dated Marilyn. You know what I mean? I don't think that all the people that came forward were actually dating her. I don't think that they actually really knew her. It was just for publicity. But at the same time, too, because she dated so many people and she was known to be this sex symbol and that sort of thing, and because she was married so many times, I mean, it's not a lot compared to Hollywood stars today, but back then, I mean, think about it. That was back in the day, like three marriages and 3 divorces. So that's a big deal back then. And I do think that by society, she was looked at as a hussy. I'm going to use an old school term, but I do think that she was viewed as a hussy, and I think that she didn't understand that if you're going to sleep with people, it doesn't mean that they love you. For some people, it doesn't mean anything. And I do think that she might have done that and been taken advantage of quite a number of times, because she just wanted people to love her. She just wanted to be a star. And I don't know, I feel like the trauma that she endured and the fact that she never knew who her father was, she didn't have a father figure. And the father figures that she did have, they hurt her in ways that would traumatize any child. But I do think that Marilyn was naive, and that she was taken advantage of, especially in Hollywood. She was definitely taken advantage of. But again, she's not a dumb blonde because she negotiated quite a number of things. She's actually pretty freaking smart if you ask me. In the end, I do think that she not necessarily got what she wanted, but in a way she did. All she wanted was to be loved. And she is remembered and loved by so many people, even after almost 58 years since her tragic death. So in the end, she's very loved by so many people. And she's still well known today. I mean, Marilyn Monroe is a household name. When my grandmother was alive, I talked to her about Marilyn Monroe, and she remembers watching Marilyn Monroe way back when she first started. And then there's me. We talked about Marilyn Monroe movies because I loved her movies so much. There are people today that are much younger than me, and they have watched Marilyn Monroe movies. So I think that she is an icon. I think that she's just that. She's an icon. But if you guys have watched up to here, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, support me on Patreon, check out my merch. Let me know what you guys think about Marilyn Monroe, whether it be as a person or the conspiracy theories surrounding her death. Or maybe you think that she did do this on purpose. But regardless, I would love to hear your guys' comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye!